I have kept my brother's secrets for the better part of 30 years, and I mean to keep them still, but this one he would forgive me telling, because it is the only secret of his that ends in happiness rather than in a locked drawer. It began, as most of the great upheavals of Harrowgate began, with our grandmother setting down her teacup. "I have chosen Gideon's wife," she said. The morning room went so quiet I heard the clock in the hall 2 rooms away. My grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Harrowgate, was then a woman of 79 years, most of her sight gone milky at the edges, her spine straight as a fire iron and her judgment straighter still. She had buried a husband and a son, married off 3 daughters and a shocking number of other people's daughters besides, and in 40 years of arranging the affections of half the county she had never once been wrong. Not once. It was said in the drawing-rooms of 3 shires that if the Dowager of Harrowgate looked at 2 strangers across a ballroom and named them man and wife, one had only to wait for the banns. People laughed when they said it. They did not, I noticed, ever wager against it. So when she announced that she had chosen my brother's wife, it was not the idle wish of an old woman. It was a decree, and everyone at that table knew it. Everyone, that is, except my brother, who was not at the table, being at that hour out on the East Ridge working a young horse that 3 grooms had already declined to sit. "And who," asked our Aunt Sybil, in the careful voice she used when she wished to sound delighted and did not, "is the fortunate lady?" "I shall tell Gideon first," said my grandmother. "It is his marriage. He ought to hear it before the county does." "He will refuse," I said. I said it because it was true, and because I was the only person in the house permitted to say true things to her without flinching. My grandmother turned her clouded eyes toward my voice, and, I would swear, saw me perfectly well. "Of course he will refuse, Christopher," she said. "He refuses everything. He has refused every eligible woman brought within a mile of this house for 6 years. He refuses because he is afraid, and a frightened man says no to the whole world so that he need not say no to the one thing that would cost him something. I am not troubled that he will refuse. I am only troubled by how long he means to take about it." That was the whole of my grandmother in a sentence. She saw straight through the walls people built, hers being the one gaze in England that a man could not stare down. I should tell you about my brother, because the rest of it makes no sense unless you understand what manner of man was being disposed of over the breakfast china. Gideon Ware, the Duke of Harrowgate, was 5 years my elder and, by the reckoning of everyone who had never troubled to know him, the coldest man in the north. He had come into the title at 24, our father dying of a fever caught in the low fields, and Gideon had shouldered the dukedom the way he shouldered everything, which was to say entirely alone and without complaint, and with a face like a shut gate. He was tall, dark, broad through the shoulder from a life spent on horseback, and he had the sort of stillness that made loud men go quiet when he entered a room. Tenants trusted him and feared him in the same breath. He was scrupulously just and never once warm, and he had a way of looking at a person that felt like being weighed. There had been a woman once. I was 17 when it happened and understood little of it at the time, but I understood the after. Her name was Cassandra, and she was beautiful in the way that stops conversation, and Gideon at 23 had loved her with the whole of his careful heart. She had let him. She had worn his mother's ring for a summer. And then, when a marquis with a larger fortune and a nearer London house made his offer, she had returned the ring by a servant, with a note, and married the marquis before the leaves turned. I remember Gideon reading the note in the library, and I remember that he did not rage or weep. He folded it very precisely, put it in a drawer, and locked the drawer, and from that hour he was a different man, not crueler, but sealed, as a house is sealed against a coming winter. He decided, I think, in that one afternoon that he had been a fool to want, and that the surest way never to be a fool again was never to want. 6 years he had kept that resolution. 6 years of turning aside heiresses and beauties and clever wits, of dancing exactly one dance per ball and no more, of a bachelor's dukedom growing colder by the season while our grandmother watched and said nothing and waited. And in the third of those years, a young woman had come to live among us whom none of us thought to count. Her name was Clara Ashworth. She had come to us as our grandmother's companion. The old woman's sight had begun to fail in earnest, and she required someone to read to her, to write her letters, to walk with her in the garden and manage her endless correspondence, and endure her endless opinions. A genteel young person of good manners and no fortune, which is a description that fits a great many quietly desperate women in England. My grandmother had interviewed 11 of them. She had engaged the 12th. Clara was the daughter of a country physician, a Dr. Ashworth of a small town 3 days' ride to the south, a man by every account clever and kind and hopeless with money, who had physicked the poor for nothing and the rich for very little and died leaving his only child a good education, a love of books, a straight pair of shoulders, and a stack of debts that ate the house and everything in it. She had been 23 when she came to us, with no living relation who would own her, and no prospect on this earth but service. I confess I scarcely marked her at first. That is the shame of it, and I set it down honestly. For the better part of a year I walked past Clara Ashworth in the corridors of my own home, and thought her a pleasant, plain, useful sort of person, and thought no more. She was not plain as it happened. I had simply not looked. She had a quiet, clear face, brown hair that would not stay entirely pinned, and gray eyes that took in a room and gave very little back. She dressed in the 2 or 3 sober gowns that a companion's wage allows and wore them without apology. She was, in the particular way of the truly poor who have been well raised, immaculately, unbreakably dignified. And she was not afraid of my brother. That was the first thing about her that made me look twice. I saw it the winter before the summer of which I am telling. Gideon had come into the library where Clara was reading aloud to our grandmother, and the room had done what rooms did when Gideon entered, gone still, braced. Our grandmother had asked some question about a passage, and Gideon, standing at the window with his back to us, had answered it curtly and wrongly. And Clara Ashworth, a penniless companion who might be turned out of the only roof over her head by a word from that man, had looked up from her book and said, mildly, "I don't think that's right, Your Grace," and then explained in 3 clear sentences precisely why it was not. I held my breath. Aunt Sybil, had she been there, would have fainted for economy. Gideon turned around. He looked at Clara for a long moment with that weighing look of his, the one that made grown men shift their feet. And Clara looked back at him, not insolently, not fearfully, simply steadily, a person who believed she was right and was not going to pretend otherwise to spare a duke's feelings. "You're correct," my brother said after a moment. "I misremembered," and he left the room. I remember thinking, how strange. And then I forgot it because I was young and stupid, and it did not occur to me that the strangest things are always the small ones. My grandmother had not forgotten it. My grandmother, I would learn, forgot nothing. She told Gideon of her decision 3 days after she told the rest of us, and I was there, because she wished me there, and I have wondered since whether she wished me there precisely so that one day I might tell this story truthfully. It was evening. Gideon came in from the stables smelling of horse and cold air, still in his riding coat, and found our grandmother waiting for him by the fire with the particular composure of a general who has already won the battle and is merely waiting for the enemy to notice. "Sit down, Gideon," she said. "I'd rather stand, grandmother. What is it?" "You'll want to sit for this. Christopher, don't slink off. This concerns you too, in the sense that everything that gives me pleasure concerns you." I did not slink. I sat in the corner and made myself small, which is a younger brother's whole art. Gideon did not sit. He stood by the fire with his arms folded, and his gait of a face shut fast, waiting. "I am 79, my grandmother said. "I shall not see 80 out, no, don't. I've no patience for that face. I'm perfectly cheerful about it. I've had a great deal more time than most and used it better than nearly anyone. but I will not go into the ground with the thing undone that I have wanted done these 6 years. You are 1030. You have no wife and no heir, and this house, which your father loved and his father before him, will pass to a cousin in Northumberland whom you dislike and I detest. I will not have it. I have chosen your wife. You will marry her." I watched my brother's jaw set. "No," he said, gently for him. He was never cruel to her. She was the one soul on earth he had never sealed the gate against. "No, grandmother. I know why you want it, and I honor the wanting, and the answer is no. I will not be married off like a colt at a fair. I have told you this. I have told everyone this." "I know why you say no," said my grandmother. "You say no because of a stupid, beautiful, faithless girl who returned my mother's ring by a footman 15 years ago, and because you decided, at 23, in a fit of wounded pride, that the safest life is a life in which you want nothing. And you have kept to that decision with a discipline I would admire in almost any other cause. Gideon, my dear, it has made you into a good duke and a lonely man, and I am tired of watching it." The fire cracked. Gideon said nothing, but a muscle moved in his cheek, and I knew, I had known him all my life, that she had struck bone. "Hear the name," my grandmother said. "That is all I ask tonight. Hear the name and give me one summer. If at summer's end you tell me you cannot, I will never speak of it again, and I will make my peace with the cousin in Northumberland. God help this house. One summer and one name. Will you deny an old woman that?" It was, of course, exactly calculated. She knew he would refuse a bride. She knew he could not refuse her that. "I will hear the name," Gideon said, "so that I may refuse it with courtesy rather than in ignorance. Who is she?" "Some heiress you've had smuggled up from London. Sybil's dreadful goddaughter. Say it and be done." And my grandmother smiled, the small, terrible, patient smile of a woman who has waited 3 years to say a single word, and she said it. "Clara." I have never in my life seen my brother look as he looked then. Confusion first, plain and honest, the look of a man who has been handed a word in a language he half knows, and then understanding, arriving slowly, the way cold water finds its way through a coat. And then, this is the part I have never told him I saw, something that was not refusal at all, something that flinched across his face and was gone before he could seal the gate on it. So quick I might have imagined it, except that I have thought about it every day since, and I know I did not. "Clara Ashworth," my brother said, "your companion." "My companion," my grandmother agreed. "The physician's daughter, the girl who reads to me and corrects your Latin and is not afraid of you. Yes, her." "Grandmother," Gideon's voice had gone very flat, which was how it went when he was truly moved and meant to conceal it. "She is a servant in this house. She is a gentleman's daughter in reduced circumstances, which you know perfectly well, and she is worth more than any 6 heiresses that have crossed that threshold in 6 years, which you also know, because you have watched her the same as I have, only you have not let yourself understand what you were watching. I am old, Gideon. I am not blind, well, I am nearly blind, but not in the way that matters. I have watched you for 3 years find reasons to be in the library when she reads. I have watched you remember what she says. I have watched the one person in this house who does not flinch from you, and I have watched you go toward her the way a cold man goes toward a fire without ever admitting he is cold. And I have decided that I am done watching." The silence after that went on a long time. "No," Gideon said at last, but it was a different no than the first. The first no had been a gate. This one had a crack in it, and my grandmother heard the crack, and so did I, and so, I think, did my brother, which frightened him more than anything our grandmother could have said. "One summer," said my grandmother, and picked up her teacup. The audience concluded. "You promised me one summer. I shall hold you to it. Christopher, ring for more coal. Your brother has let the fire go down." That was how it began. Now I want to be honest about a thing, because this story has been told wrongly in the county, turned into a piece of drawing-room comedy, the old dragon of Harrowgate bullying her grandson to the altar. It was not like that. My grandmother did not bully. My grandmother arranged, and there is a world of difference. She did not lock Gideon and Clara in a room and turn the key. She did something far cleverer and far kinder. She simply stopped keeping them apart. For 3 years, without any of us marking it, my grandmother had kept a careful, invisible distance between her grandson and her companion, the natural distance of rank, the companion in the background, the duke in the fore, their paths crossing only in her presence and under her management. Now she took the fences down. She was suddenly, conveniently, always tired. She required Clara to carry messages to the Duke about estate matters. She required the Duke to escort Clara to the far library when the old woman wanted a particular volume. She developed a great and sudden interest in the rose garden, which happened to be the one place on the estate my brother walked each morning, and she required her companion to gather roses there at precisely the hour he walked. She did not force a single thing. She merely arranged the ground so that the two of them, left to their own natures, would find each other. And then she sat back, mostly blind and entirely watchful, and let the summer do the rest. And the summer did. I had a better view of it than anyone, because I was that useless and beloved thing, a duke's younger brother with no duties and a great deal of curiosity. I saw the whole of it unfold as one might watch a garden come on, nothing to see one day, and then, if you had the patience to look, everything. The first I truly saw was in the rose garden, perhaps a week after the name was spoken. I had come out early with a headache and a bad conscience. I had been in the village too late the night before, and I sat on the old stone bench half hidden by the yew hedge, and so neither of them knew I was there. Clara was cutting roses for my grandmother's rooms, a flat basket over her arm, entirely absorbed. And my brother came down the gravel path in his riding dress, and saw her and stopped. He might have gone another way. There were a dozen paths through that garden. He did not take another way. He stood a moment, and I watched him decide, and then he came on. "Miss Ashworth." She looked up. Not startled, Clara was never startled, but wary, which she had cause to be, for she was not a fool, and something had shifted in the house since the night the name was spoken, and she had felt it without understanding it. "Your Grace," a slight inclination of the head, she went back to her roses. Most women addressed by my brother filled the silence with chatter from nerves. Clara let the silence sit. She cut a rose. She cut another. And it was Gideon in the end, the most silent man in England, who could not bear the quiet Gideon who spoke. "You cut them too long," he said. Clara looked at the stem in her hand. "I beg your pardon." "The stems. You cut them too long. They'll drink the water down in a day and drown the blooms. Cut them shorter and split the base." He held out his hand. I saw the strangeness of it, the Duke of Harrowgate holding out his hand for a stem of roses, and after a moment she gave him one, and he drew a small knife from his pocket and cut it and split it and gave it back. "There, they'll last the week." Clara looked at the rose. Then she looked at him with that steady gray look. "Where," she said, "does a duke learn to keep flowers?" And my brother, who did not explain himself to anyone, said after a moment, "My mother, she grew them. This whole garden was hers. When I was a boy she'd have me out here at dawn with a basket, and I'd complain, and she'd tell me a man who couldn't keep a garden alive had no business being trusted with an estate." He stopped, as if surprised at himself. He had not spoken of our mother in years. "I haven't told anyone that," he said, half to himself. "Then I'll keep it," said Clara simply, and cut the next stem short and split the base, and did not make a thing of it. And I saw my brother watch her do it. And I saw something in his shut face come very slightly open, like a window on the first warm morning, and I thought, "Oh, oh no, grandmother, you clever old devil, you've done it." I want to be clear that it was not smooth, this coming together. My brother did not go from a sealed man to an open one across a summer of tidy stages. He fought it the whole way, because fighting was the only thing he trusted himself to do. There were whole weeks that summer when he was colder to Clara than to anyone, precisely because he could not afford to be warm, Days, he'd pass her in the gallery and give her a bare nod and stride on, and I'd see her look after him with a small crease between her brows, unable to make him out. This man who cut her roses one morning and cut her dead the next. And Clara, for her part, gave him nothing he had not earned. She did not soften toward him because he was a duke, and she did not harden toward him because he was cold. She met each version of him exactly as it came, with a maddening evenness that I think, in the end, was the very thing that undid him. He had spent 6 years being feared or flattered, and here was a woman who did neither, who simply looked at him and saw a man and treated him accordingly. To a soul as starved as my brother's, that plain sight was a more dangerous thing than any beauty. There was an evening in the music room I remember. My grandmother had asked Clara to play. Clara played well, an accomplishment left over from the days before her father's debts, one of the few things poverty had not managed to take, and the family had gathered, Aunt Sybil and her insipid friends down from the neighboring house, and myself, and Gideon in the corner with a book he was not reading. Clara played something quiet and old, and when she finished, Aunt Sybil, who had brought with her a genuine heiress that season, a Miss Penhallow, all ringlets and 8,000 a year and the conversation of a dropped glove, said, in the carrying voice of a woman doing a kindness she means to be seen doing, "Charmingly done, Miss Ashworth. It's so pleasant when a companion can make herself useful of an evening. Miss Penhallow, of course, plays too, but then Miss Penhallow needn't." The insult was neat, it said. You play because you must sing for your supper. The heiress plays because she chooses. It hung in the air. Clara's hands rested on the keys, and I saw her spine go a little straighter, and I thought she would say nothing, because saying nothing was the safest thing a companion could do. And then my brother spoke from his corner, without looking up from his book. Miss Ashworth, he said, plays because she loves it. One can hear the difference. Miss Penhallow, I've no doubt, is very accomplished. A pause, dry as a bone, but no one has ever wept at a well-executed scale. The room did not know where to look. Aunt Sybil went the color of her wine, and Clara turned on the piano stool and looked at my brother, and for one unguarded instant her steady gray eyes were not steady at all, they were surprised, and something more than surprised, before she mastered it and turned back to the keys. My grandmother in her chair said nothing whatsoever and was so entirely satisfied that she looked half asleep. She was not asleep. She never was. I found Gideon later in the library, alone, the book abandoned, standing at the dark window looking out at nothing. That was kindly done, I said. The music room. It was only the truth, he said, not turning. Gideon, I am not, as a rule, a serious man. My whole life has been an argument for not taking me seriously. But he was my brother and I loved him, and I had watched him seal himself into a cold house for 6 years, and I found I could not keep quiet. You know what grandmother's about. I know exactly what grandmother's about. And he was quiet a long time. When he spoke, his voice had lost its dryness and gone to something rower. And it is impossible, Christopher. Whatever it is that, whatever this is, it cannot be. She is a gentlewoman with no fortune and no family, a companion in my grandmother's household. If I so much as if I turned toward her, the whole county would say the Duke of Harrowgate had taken advantage of a poor girl under his roof who had no power to refuse him. They would make her a scandal and a byword. Whatever she is, whatever she, I will not do that to her. I will not make her ridiculous to satisfy an old woman's scheme or a foolishness of my own. Do you understand? The kindest thing I can do for Clara Ashworth is to want nothing from her at all. I understood then, more than he knew, that he had already lost. A man who names the thing he must not want and calls it kindness to refuse it is a man in the last ditch of a fight he has decided not to win. But I did not say so. I only said, and what does she want in all this? Have you asked her? He looked at me as though the question had not occurred to him, and I understood that too. My brother, in his careful, sealed, self-punishing way, had spent the summer deciding what was kindest for Clara, without once considering that Clara might have a view of her own, that she was not a rose to be kept alive or let die, but a woman with a will as strong as his and a great deal less to lose. "No," he admitted, "I haven't asked her." "You might try it," I said. "Asking. It's very much the fashion, I hear, among people who mean to marry." He did not laugh, but the corner of his mouth moved, which from Gideon was nearly the same thing. The trouble, when it came from where trouble always comes, from a person meaning well and doing harm. It was Aunt Sybil who let the cat out, though I have never decided whether it was malice or only her bottomless want of sense. She had guessed at some of it. She had eyes, and she had watched Gideon defend the companion in the music room, and she was appalled, in the way of a certain kind of woman, that a duke's affections might light on someone with nothing to recommend her but her character. And so, over cards one wet afternoon, with the Penhallows present in half the neighborhood, meaning I think to embarrass the notion out of existence, Aunt Sybil said, brightly and loudly and fatally, "Of course, we all know the Dowager has her heart set on making a match of the Duke and her little companion. So democratic of her. One does admire it, though I confess I can't think what the girl has done to deserve such a leap. But then, I suppose when one's grandmother arranges these things, deserving hardly enters into it." The room laughed, the small cruel laugh of people relieved that the awkwardness has landed on someone other than themselves. And Clara Ashworth was standing in the doorway with my grandmother's shawl in her hands, having come to fetch the old woman in from the damp, and she heard every word. I saw her face. I have thought about her face for a great many years. It did not crumple. She was too proud for that and too used to being spoken of as if she were furniture. But something went out of it, some light I had not known was there until I watched it withdraw, and in its place came a stillness that was worse than tears, the stillness of a person rearranging her entire understanding of her own life in the space of a breath. Because you see what she had heard. She had not heard that a duke admired her. She had heard that she was a scheme, that the small kindnesses of the summer, the roses, the defense in the music room, the strange thawing warmth that she, I know now, had let herself begin to hope was real, were none of them real at all. They were the moves in an old woman's game, and Clara was not the player but the piece. She had been managed. She had been, in the cruelest reading of it, arranged for, like a delivery of coal. She set my grandmother's shawl down very carefully on a chair, and she turned, and she walked out, and she did not run, and that not running was the most dignified and the most heartbroken thing I ever watched a person do. The scheme, in that single afternoon, came apart in my grandmother's hands, and my grandmother, for the first time in 40 years, had not seen it coming, because the one variable the old woman had failed to weigh was not Gideon's fear but Clara's pride, the fierce, unbuyable pride of a woman who had lost everything except her right to be wanted for herself. I went to find her because someone had to, and my brother had gone white and rigid at the card table and looked incapable of movement. I found her in the small back parlor that companions are given, packing. She had one shabby trunk, and it was already half full, and she was folding her 2 spare gowns with hands that were perfectly steady, which was how I knew how far past weeping she was. "Miss Ashworth." "Lord Christopher," she did not stop packing. "You needn't, I know what you've come to say, and it's kind. And it doesn't signify. I've written to an agency in York. There's always a place for a companion who'll take low wages and ask no questions. I'll be gone in the morning." Clara, I had never used her name. It stopped her for a moment. "It isn't what you think, or it is and it isn't. Grandmother did scheme, God knows she schemes the way other people breathe. But Gideon—" "Please don't." Her voice was very quiet and very level, and it cut me off cleaner than a shout. "Please don't tell me the Duke's feelings are real. I have spent 3 years in service, my lord, and I have learned the one thing service teaches, which is exactly what I am worth to the people I serve. I am worth my usefulness and not 1 penny more. I was foolish this summer. I let myself imagine I was worth something else to someone. That is my own fault, and I shall not make it again. But I will not stay in a house to be a wife arranged like a purchase, chosen by an old woman for reasons of her own, and accepted by a man who could not be bothered to want a real one. I would rather empty chamber pots in York for the rest of my life and be no one's scheme. Do you understand me, my lord? I would rather be poor and free than kept and arranged. Now please, let me pack. I understood her entirely. And I understood, standing in that mean little room watching a penniless woman choose her dignity over the greatest match in 3 counties, that my grandmother had been righter than she knew. That this exact fierceness, was the very thing that made Clara Ashworth worth more than 6 heiresses, and that if my brother let her walk out of that house in the morning, he would deserve every cold year that came after. I went to tell him so. I found Gideon in the library where he went with everything, standing again at that dark window, and I did not soften it. "She's leaving," I said. "In the morning. She's written to an agency in York for a companion's place at low wages. She heard Sybil. She thinks she's a scheme, thinks the whole summer was grandmother's game and you a man too cold to want a real wife, so you took the arranged one. She'd rather be poor and free than kept and managed. And Gideon, she's right to go if that's all it is. If she's a scheme to you, let her go and be ashamed of yourself for the rest of your life." He turned from the window. His face was not shut now. It was open, and what was on it was fear, plain naked fear, the fear of a man at the edge of the exact drop he has spent 15 years walking carefully around. "And if she's not a scheme," he said, his voice was not steady. I had not heard my brother's voice unsteady since the night our father died. "If she's not a scheme, Christopher, if she's the only thing in 15 years then what am I to do? I have no right. I'm the man who could ruin her by wanting her. I'm the reason the whole county's laughing at her tonight. The kindest thing." "Stop it." I was angry now, which is rare for me. "Stop hiding behind kindness, Gideon. It's a coward's coat and you've worn it too long. You keep saying the kindest thing is to want nothing. Have you asked her what she wants? She just told me. She said she'd rather be wanted and poor than arranged and kept. She doesn't want your protection, you great fool. She wants your honesty. She wants to be chosen, not by grandmother, by you. And you've never once in this whole summer done the one brave thing, which is to walk up to that woman without a scheme or a strategy or a coat of kindness to hide in and tell her the truth. She's leaving at dawn. You have until then to be brave for the first time in 15 years. I'd hurry." He looked at me, and I watched the fear on his face, and then I watched something else come up underneath it, slow and certain, the thing my grandmother had been waiting 6 years to see. I watched my brother decide to want something out loud, knowing it might cost him everything, and choose to want it anyway. "Where is she?" he said. "Packing the back parlor, Gideon." He was already moving. "Gideon, not the Duke, go as yourself." He stopped in the doorway. "I don't know that I know who that is any more," he said, quite honestly. "She does," I said. "That's the whole point. Go and let her introduce you to him." I did not follow. Some things a brother has no business watching. But Clara told me the rest of it, years later, on a summer evening not unlike that one, with her own children asleep upstairs, and she told it plainly and without flourish, which is how she tells everything, and I set it down here as near to her words as I can. She was folding the last of her gowns, she said, when the knock came. She thought it was me again, or a maid, and she said, "Come," without turning. And then the room went still in the particular way it went still when he entered, and she knew, without looking, who it was. She did not turn around. She kept her hands on the gown. "Your Grace," she said, "you oughtn't be here. It won't help my character, a duke in a companion's room at night." Bitterness in it which was not like her, but she was past minding. "I know," Gideon said. "I'll go in a moment. I came to ask you not to leave. And then, if you still wish to, I'll take you to York myself in my own carriage with a character in my own hand that will get you any place in England you please. You have my word on it. But I came to ask you first." "To stay and be your arranged wife," she said, still not turning. "Chosen by your grandmother, because the old woman's never wrong and it's convenient and I'm to hand and I don't fear you. I heard the reckoning, your grace. I know exactly what I'm worth in it." "No," said my brother. "You don't. Turn around, Clara, please. I've never asked you for anything. I'm asking you to look at me while I say this because I've spent 15 years never saying it to anyone, and I shall likely do it badly, and I'd like at least to do it to your face." And she turned around, she said, because of the pleas which she had never once heard from him. And the Duke of Harrowgate, the coldest man in the north, the man who had folded a note and locked a drawer and sealed himself against the whole world for 15 years, he stood in a companion's mean little room among her packed and shabby things, and he did the one thing none of us had ever seen him do. He went down. He knelt on the bare boards so that he was looking up at her rather than down, a duke on his knees before a penniless companion, and he took the fear off his face and let her see all the way in. "My grandmother chose you," he said. "That much is true, and I'll not lie to you about it. You've had enough lies today. She chose you 3 years ago, and she's been schooling us toward each other all summer, and I knew it, and I let it happen, and I told myself the whole time it was only her scheme so that I needn't admit it was my own heart. That was the cowardice, not the wanting, the pretending I didn't. She chose you, Clara, but that is not why I'm on my knees. I'm on my knees because she was right. Because in 15 years you are the first person who ever looked at me and saw a man and not a duke, and told me the truth to my face when the truth was unwelcome, and was not afraid of me, and did not flatter me, and would not be bought. I have been so cold for so long, and you walked into my grandmother's library 3 years ago, and told me I was wrong about a passage of Latin, and something in me that I thought was dead for good turned over and started to wake. And I've been fighting it ever since because I was afraid to want, because the last time I wanted, I was made a fool. And I would rather be a fool 1,000 times over than let you walk out of this house at dawn and spend the rest of my life knowing I was too much a coward to ask. So I'm asking, not the Duke asking his grandmother's choice. Me, Gideon, asking Clara, stay, not as anything arranged, as my wife because I have chosen you entirely and only myself, and I will spend every year I have proving it was my own choosing. And if the answer is no, if I've come to this too late and too clumsily and done you too much harm this summer to be forgiven, then I'll take you to York in the morning as I said, and you'll never hear my name again. But I couldn't let you go without letting you see that it was real, that you were never a scheme to me. You were the one thing I couldn't scheme my way out of wanting. And Clara Ashworth, she told me, stood in that little room and looked down at the most powerful and most feared man in 3 counties kneeling on her bare floor with his whole locked heart finally, terrifyingly open. And she found that she was weeping, which she had refused to do for hours, and that she had reached out without deciding to and put her hand against his dark hair. And that the fierce pride which had carried her out of the card room and half-packed her trunk had not, in the end, one word to say against a man who had knelt down and made himself smaller than her so that she might, for once in 3 years of service, be the one who was reached up to. "You cut my roses short," she said through the tears, which is a foolish thing to say and exactly the right one. "The first morning, in the garden, you said they'd drown otherwise, and I thought no one has done a kind thing for me since my father died, and this cold duke has cut my roses so they'll last the week. I've been half in love with you since the rose garden, you impossible man, and I have been so angry about it because I thought it wasn't allowed." "It's allowed," my brother said from the floor. "God help us both, Clara, it's allowed." "Then get up off my dreadful floor," she said, "before you ruin your knees and I have to hear about it for 40 years. And ask me again standing properly like a gentleman, and I'll give you your answer." And he got up, and he asked her again standing properly, and she gave him her answer. The answer in case 40 years and 4 children, and a house full of light have not made it plain enough, was yes. My grandmother, when they told her the next morning, Clara's trunk unpacked, her face washed of tears and lit from within, my brother beside her looking 10 years younger and faintly stunned, like a man who has walked through a door he thought was a wall and found a garden on the other side. My grandmother, who had schemed for 6 years, and nearly lost it all in an afternoon to a companion's pride, received the news of her own triumph with insufferable composure. "Well," she said, and set down her teacup. "It took you long enough. Christopher, is she crying? Clara, my dear, don't cry. It's very bad for the complexion, and you'll want yours at the wedding. I chose you 3 years ago, you know. The first week you were here. You corrected me on a point of Herodotus and did not apologize for it, and I thought there. That one. She'll do for Gideon when the great sealed fool finally works up the courage, which at the rate he was going I feared I should not live to see." She turned her clouded eyes toward my brother with vast satisfaction. "I have never once been wrong in 40 years, and I do not intend to spoil the record on my deathbed. You may all thank me at the wedding breakfast. Now go away, the lot of you. An old woman needs her rest, and Clara, you'll still read to me of an evening, Duchess or no. I've grown used to your voice, and I shan't have it said I lost a good reader merely because I gained a granddaughter." They were married in the autumn, in the little estate chapel, with the whole county come to gawk and finding, to its disappointment, nothing to gawk at but two people plainly and completely in love. Aunt Sybil wept all through the service and told everyone afterward that she had seen it coming from the first and had done everything in her power to encourage it, which is the way of aunts. Miss Penhallow married a baronet in Kent and was, by all accounts, exactly as happy as 8,000 a year can make a person, which is to say adequately. And the cousin in Northumberland got nothing, which pleased my grandmother more than the wedding. My grandmother lived to see it, and to hold, the following summer, the first of Gideon's children, a girl, with her father's dark hair and her mother's steady gray eyes, and she held that child in the rose garden that had been our mother's, and she looked down at her with her nearly blind eyes and said, "This one will be trouble. Look how she stares." Excellent, and she died that winter in her sleep, having, as she pointed out to me not a week before, never once in her life been wrong, and having arranged with her last great scheme, the only marriage I have ever known that was entirely made of truth. I have watched my brother for many years now. I have watched the cold man thaw all the way through and stay thawed. I have watched him keep the rose garden himself, out at dawn with a basket, his children complaining exactly as he once complained, and Clara laughing at all of them from the terrace. I have watched a man who decided at 23 that the safest life was a life of wanting nothing learn, at 30, that he had been precisely wrong about the one thing that mattered, that the safe life is not the guarded one but the given one, and that the drawer he locked against the world had been keeping the cold in as surely as it kept the hurt out. And I have thought more than once that my grandmother's great gift was never really the matching. Any clever woman with 40 years and a good eye can put two suitable people in a room. My grandmother's gift was that she saw, 3 years before anyone else, that the loneliest man in the north and the proudest poor woman in her own parlor were each carrying the exact shape of the other's missing piece, and that she had the patience to wait, and the nerve to scheme, and the wisdom at the very end to step back and let them choose it themselves, so that it would be theirs and not hers. She was never wrong, my grandmother, not once in 40 years, but of all the matches she made, the one she was proudest of was the one that nearly slipped through her fingers, the duke who would not want, and the companion who would not be arranged, and the single summer in which they each learned that the bravest thing in the world is not to guard your heart but to hold it out open in your two hands and say to another person, "Here, it's yours. It was always meant to be yours. Stay." They are upstairs now, the pair of them, gray at the temples and still, after all these years, the last to leave a room they are both in. And the rose garden is full to the walls, and it lasts the whole summer through, because he still cuts the stems short.